The US and Europe a broken alliance? It's official. The relationship between the United States and Europe has collapsed. What transpired last week in the Oval Office between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelenskyy is set to have major global consequences. By now, you've likely seen the viral clips of their meeting, but no one could have anticipated just how intense it would be. You don't have the cards right now. You're gambling with the lives of millions. You're gambling with World War III. Why was Zelenskyy in Washington? Zelenskyy traveled to Washington, D.C. as part of a high-stakes effort to secure security guarantees from the U.S. and ensure Ukraine's protection against future conflicts with Russia. However, he left empty-handed. Instead, a major deal was struck, one that could change the balance of power in global trade. Ukraine possesses vast underground reserves of critical minerals such as lithium, graphite, cobalt, titanium, and rare earth elements, which are vital for industries ranging from defense to electric vehicles. The United States government has now secured a deal that grants it future revenue from Ukraine's mineral sales. Given that China dominates nearly 90% of the world's rare earth processing, Trump sees this agreement as a strategic move to challenge Beijing's control over the supply chain. The end of the United States-Europe partnership. Trump's administration has made it clear that Europe is no longer a priority. With new 25% tariffs imposed on European goods and the dissolution of the US-EU partnership, it's evident that Europe is no longer viewed as an ally. Militarily, economically, and technologically, Europe now finds itself sidelined in negotiations that directly impact its own continent. The message is clear: the war in Ukraine will end on America's terms. NATO's changing stance. To see just how much the geopolitical landscape has shifted, look no further than NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Back in October 2024, he declared Ukraine's path to NATO membership is irreversible. At that time, the Biden administration was fully committed to supporting Ukraine, providing billions in aid and even long-range missile systems. However, just 4 months later, Rutte reversed his position, stating that Ukraine was never promised NATO membership. This turnaround highlights a brutal truth. Alliances are fluid, and support can vanish overnight. Henry Kissinger's famous words resonate now more than ever. To be an enemy of America is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. The U.S. is moving on. Ukraine has become too much of a burden for the United States. After 3 years of supposed unwavering support, the U.S. government is now ready to walk away. The tragedy? Ukraine has sacrificed an entire generation, made territorial concessions, and now finds itself abandoned. Even more painful is the realization that peace negotiations were sabotaged multiple times over the past 3 years. The U.S. strategy, a hard pivot. To understand the fallout from the Trump-Zelenskyy meeting, we must go back to Vice President J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference 2 weeks prior. In his address, Vance outlined 5 key realities of the Trump administration's approach to the war in Ukraine and Europe's security. Check 1, check. J.D. Vance states that Europe has benefited greatly from U.S. support, despite often pursuing policies that conflict with American interests. J.D. Vance points out that Russia holds a significant numerical advantage in manpower and weaponry, which will persist regardless of Western aid. J.D. Vance mentions that the U.S. has substantial leverage over both Ukraine and Russia. J.D. Vance states that ending the war requires direct negotiations with those involved. J.D. Vance emphasizes that the conflict is harmful to Ukraine, Russia, Europe, and most importantly, the United States. J.D. Vance concludes by saying that neither Europe nor the Biden administration nor the Ukrainians had any pathway to victory. That was true 3 years ago, it was true 2 years ago, it was true last year, and it is true today. This statement sent shockwaves through Europe and raised serious concerns about NATO's future. Can Europe survive without the United States? With the United States signaling that Europe is no longer a priority, European leaders face a pivotal decision: continue clinging to a deteriorating transatlantic alliance or chart an independent course. Now, Europe stands at a crossroads. Should they forge their own path or try to mend the strained ties with the United States? Meanwhile, President Trump has his own agenda, focusing on domestic issues and redefining America's role on the global stage. Geopolitical expert Kishore Mahbubani recently argued that European nations have three radical options. First, withdraw from NATO. By investing 5% of GDP in defense, Europe could build a $1.1 trillion military budget, rivaling the US, and assert independence. Second, strike a grand bargain with Russia. A realistic compromise on Ukraine's borders could ease tensions and secure stability in Europe. Third, forge a new alliance with China. Partnering with China could help Europe address its most pressing issue: Africa's population boom and the migration crisis. Europe at a crossroads. For nearly a century, Europe has relied on US leadership. Now, with the US shifting focus, European leaders must decide whether to remain subservient to Washington or take control of their own destiny. One thing is certain: the world is changing and Europe's place in it is no longer guaranteed. The real reason behind Trump's focus on minerals. Trump's first 45 days in office have revealed his priorities: energy dominance and securing access to the world's most critical minerals. The administration has already imposed tariffs on aluminum, steel, and likely copper next. The United States Geological Survey recently classified copper as a critical mineral due to its importance in energy infrastructure and defense. Given that China consumes 57% of the world's copper supply, Trump is determined to strengthen U.S. mining operations. As the world moves into a new geopolitical era, the U.S. is securing its own economic and security interests first. Europe must now decide whether to remain tethered to Washington's shifting policies or carve out its own independent future. The choices made today will shape the global order for decades to come.